Hello, this is the Consciousness Podcast, and I'm your host, Stuart Preston. Each episode, I have a conversation with an expert in human consciousness. In this episode, I had the honor of speaking with Dr. Dennis McKenna, an ethnopharmacologist, research pharmacognosist, lecturer, and author. He's also the founder of the McKenna Academy and a board member at the Heffter Research Institute. We talked about psychedelics and consciousness. So let's hear what Dennis McKenna had to say about human consciousness, including psychedelics' role in its evolution. Dr. McKenna, thank you so much for being here, here on the Consciousness Podcast. I really appreciate your time. And obviously, this is about consciousness. Normally, I wouldn't launch in with the big hard question about what is consciousness, but I kind of wanted to lay down a little bit of a foundation and get an understanding from you and kind of what your views and opinions and thoughts and theories are on what consciousness is in terms of, does it come out of the brain matter? Is there a duality to it, a universal or cosmic consciousness? If you were to discuss consciousness and describe it or even define it, what does it mean to you?
Well, you don't start with the easy questions, do you?
Yeah, no, I would normally not want to start it there, but the other questions I have for you seem to kind of grow out of that, like my ceiling.
Yeah. Well, yes, thank you. Thank you for invited me to be on the podcast. Obviously, I think there is no cut and dried answer about consciousness. I think that I think that nobody really knows all that it is, and there are numerous aspects of it. I think in the simplest instantiation, if you want to use that word, consciousness is awareness, awareness of the self, awareness of being, and not necessarily tied to an ego, but some awareness of our selfhood, call it attention or something like that, in the simplest way to look at it. But then where does that come from? Does that come from the brain, or is that something that's built into the structure of reality? Is consciousness everywhere? And this is the perpetual question: is the brain an antenna, is a receiver of consciousness, or a generator of consciousness, or or something in between,
Mm-hmm.
And there is always the issue of duality here. My own personal sort of view that I've come to, having taken a lot of psychedelics and thinking about consciousness, I sometimes talk about the reality hallucination, and which in neuroscience, I think the current buzzword is the default mode network,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't equate to consciousness, but it's a part of it. The reality hallucination is essentially, in my view, this model of the world that our brain creates, that we inhabit, and it's based in part on external information that comes through us through our senses, but then they are processed through through associations and memories and all sorts of internal elements that those things might be associated with. And then it's kind of extruded, if you will, into this model of reality, which is our day-to-day conscious experience. And it's a model of reality, but it's not reality. Reality is unknowable, essentially, but it's a pretty good model as far as we know. It's functional, and it's impoverished, compared to what reality itself would be. A lot of what the brain does, and goes back to the function of the default mode network, it damps things down. It blocks a lot of the information because we couldn't handle it. It's a selective filter. And, I think there's, in neuroscience, I think they call this neural gating. The information gets into through your senses and into your conscious awareness, but it's a highly massaged kind of thing, and it's less rich. than raw experience. And it's less rich, but it's also more practical in the sense that it furnishes us with a model of reality that makes sense, that lets us navigate, and at least feel. We know it's a delusion, but it's a practical delusion. At least feel, that we're located in a space and time, and a world that's relatively predictable and solid, and physics and other experiences tell us that's not really what the real world looks like anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that the conundrum is, well, you have to trust your instruments, and that's also part of this artificial reality that you construct. So you get into these tautologies, but I think that's what our experience of consciousness is this sort of model of reality that we inhabit. Now, psychedelics and other types of altered states can temporarily disrupt all that, but it doesn't abolish consciousness exactly. You're still conscious in a psychedelic state. I think from the pharmacology standpoint, the only thing, or the class of drugs that abolish consciousness are the anesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
You can take an anesthetic and you're absolutely unconscious for that period of time. It just seems to inactivate those higher brain centers that generate consciousness. The psychedelics do not do that. But I think they do. I'll tell you what I think they do. I think they disrupt this neural gating in a certain respect. I sometimes say, they bring the background forward, or they at least make you aware of things in the background that we are programmed to suppress because they're not useful for constructing this model most of the time, and they're a distraction from our being focused on what's right in front of us, and I also think that, this model of reality that we construct is, something that we develop over time, and there are different degrees. I think, for example, children or indigenous people are potentially open to a lot more messages from the background that we've learned, as Western literate, scientifically oriented adults, we've learned to filter those things out. But that doesn't mean they're not there and they're not real. And I think that's one of the areas that psychedelics can be very helpful, because they make you aware that there is this whole other realm of experience that normally is filtered out. I think it's very useful to disable those filters, because it gives you a perspective on sort of expanded consciousness, I guess you could call it, realm of experience. And then also from the therapeutic point of view, I think it's this ability that psychedelics have to let you step out of your reference frame, out of your box, literally, temporarily. And if you're dealing with some issue like trauma or addiction or many of the depression, many of the things that psychedelics are used to treat, I think this is how it enables you to do it. It lets you step back from that and look at it from a different perspective, almost as though you were examining your existential situation as like a dispassionate observer, and you can have insights about your situation, and then you can say, well, that's what's wrong. Sort of understand these feedback loops that we get into, these habits that are not helpful, and they tend to reinforce each other. I often compare this process of disrupting the default mode network. It's kind of like rebooting your computer. Computer needs certain things to function, but errors accumulate. If you go a long time without rebooting it, you get a lot of kludge built up, and so the operating system slows down. It doesn't work as well.
Mm-hmm.
And rebooting it often resets a lot of things. I think that's more or less that's very close to what psychedelics do. They provide you a big serotonergic reset, and then the system is very resilient, and you're disrupting the equilibrium, but the equilibrium, will fall back together. It will reconstitute, reintegrate, but it works better after that. It's almost as though you've cleaned out a lot of the cobwebs, and temporarily, you can think more clearly, and you have I guess you get the point that I'm saying. You have a more your apprehension of the world and your place in it is more functional and more reflective of how it actually is.
Because you're building these models, and it's interesting what we said in the beginning is consciousness is, reality is created by our consciousness, by our experience, by what we're perceiving.
Right. It's the reality hallucination.
Yeah, the reality hallucination, that the brain is creating that. When you're on hallucinogens, you've almost shifted that reality, and you're almost creating a different reality, that non-ordinary state of consciousness, the non-ordinary reality. But
right.
Then when you come out of it, you've cleaned up all the kludge, so to speak, and now you've got kind of a cleaned up reality to observe and perceive.
Right, exactly. And what's important to remember is, we're on drugs all the time. We are made out of drugs, right? I mean, that's why drugs work. And so, our consciousness, whether we're on drugs or not, whether it's an external drug we've taken, but our consciousness and what we experience has got to be, on some level, a reflection of our neurochemical, Gestalt brain state at any one moment. And we can modulate that in different ways. We can go to sleep, we can take anesthetics, we can take, hallucinogens, we can modulate this kind of baseline state that we're in. So that's, and we can alter consciousness in various ways, and we're not abolishing consciousness, unlike anesthetics, which shuts the whole thing down temporarily. But these other things open up, realms of conscious experience that we are normally closed to us unless we take these substances, or we can approach it through meditation and various practices, basically induce what they call altered states, whatever those are. But wherever you are at all times, I guess, as long as you're alive, what you're experiencing is a reflection of your neurochemical brain state, which is always fluctuating, and
whatever chemicals are there naturally, whichever are introduced, is creating that reality hallucination for you.
Yeah. Without any external chemicals, it's just how you are. But again, you have to be, I think, careful about the terminology that we use. Talk about what's inside, what's outside. We're biochemical systems. We're engines made out of neurotransmitters and hormones and these various, these different signal transduction processes that, we or any organism, we're not things, we're processes. And I think that's what you could say, that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is the inner experience that we can apprehend of what it is to be a metabolizing organism. It's a reflection of metabolism. And when metabolism ceases, it's not very interesting anymore. The reason is you're dead, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's sort of like that. I think that's what it's like. Now, you can get into the wider metaphysical questions of, is there some connection to the cosmos? Is there, through quantum entanglements or other mechanisms, is there, can there be such a thing as cosmic consciousness? Or, the typical psychedelic revelation, which is always profound when you experience it, but sounds trivial when you say it, which is, we are all one, there is no separation.
Mm-hmm.
We have these experiences subjectively on psychedelics, and they're normally closed to us because they don't fit into this, the program of the default mode network, which is to keep your attention focused because, the saber-toothed tiger is coming after you, or the car on the freeway is coming after you. You need to focus on what's happening for survival. That's why modulating or being smart about your setting when you do psychedelics is so important, because you're making a conscious decision to lower those gating mechanisms to temporarily disrupt this thing that keeps you safe and focused, so that you can, experience these expanded states, and you don't have to worry about, your safety. Somebody, do it in a situation where you deliberately allow that to happen, and so that's what I think.
Yeah. So when you're in that state, in that reality hallucination, and then you take hallucinogens, you've got some examples, and I don't want to judge any of them, but maybe on one end you have cannabis or a light dose of, maybe a psilocybin mushrooms, and then on the far end you've got maybe a DMT type of experience, and there is some kind of a shift in consciousness, and maybe call it a non-ordinary state or heightened consciousness or whatever it is. Like you said, you feel one with everything. And then you're in the right set and setting, you feel one with everything, you feel something, or maybe you see entities, whatever it is. And then you come out of it and you're back to the default consciousness.
Right.
Is there anything that can cross over from one to the other? So when I'm feeling like, oh, we're all one, we're all connected, love is all that matters, and then come down out of that experience into the default world, and suddenly you're thinking, okay, now I'm back here with all my everyday problems. Is there some kind of a connection between those two states of consciousness that can carry over from one to the other?
Well, yeah, I think what it gives you is perspective. It gives you a perspective because you have this experience, so you know what it is like to step out of your reference frame, and you don't forget when you're back. When you're back to your baseline, you remember what it was like, and that can be useful. You can always reflect back on that. You don't have to necessarily take a psychedelic. You can through memory, you can relive that. Of course, it's probably a good idea if you do go to the well once in a while and drink, but we know that psychedelic experiences can have profound influences long after you've taken it, sometimes decades. And sometimes people, you don't necessarily have to keep taking a psychedelic. This is what we're finding in the therapeutic use. These are therapeutically, these are drugs that you take maybe once or twice or a few times in your life, especially if you're taking them for specific, treatment of something like PTSD or addiction. It's the exact opposite of the usual model in psychopharmacology, which is, take these for the rest of your life. And those drugs, basically, they don't work. They're Band-Aids. They don't let you get to the root of the problem. They just paper it over generally. And so they're not really effective. And if you go off them, then you're right back where you were before. So in that sense, I think psychedelics do represent a new therapeutic modality where you can, it's kind of like a controlled process of going crazy, really. I mean, there are similarities between these altered states and psychosis. And in an older generation of older, model of looking at it, they thought, these were called psychotomimetics. They mimic psychosis. Well, not really, but there are certain aspects of psychosis that are similar. There are also aspects of mystical experiences, transcendent experiences that are similar. So they used to be called mysticomimetics as well. One of the things that tells you, how difficult it is to put a finger on exactly what they do is the difficulty of language, and it's very hard to English these things or describe them in language, which is one reason why I like the word psychedelics, because even though it's got all that baggage from the 60s, I also think it's the most accurate because it's deliberately vague. It means mind manifesting. Well, whatever it does, it manifests the mind, not necessarily in the way you thought it was going to.
Right.
But it's going to manifest the mind, and so it's a useful descriptor, I think, for what these do. It all is so important, so importantly related to set and setting, and literally anything can happen on these things, and it depends on, at least internally, right? I mean, and maybe externally as well, but you're in the realm of magic and shamanism, and the key variables in setting is obviously setting has got to be appropriate, has got to be a safe vessel for these experiences to unfold. And then the set is more than just, see, people sometimes say, well, it's your intention. What do you want out of the experience? I say it goes far beyond that. Basically, the set is whatever you bring to the table through your whole span of life experiences. What you are, what you know, even what you think you know, that's the set. So the set is by far the most complex variable of this multivariate situation. The other two, besides set and setting, being what is the medicine and what is the dose.
Yeah. And so we're talking about, we've heard stories of people, like you said, it could be one dose. It could be a prescription of doses like that with PTSD and MAPS, working with 3 doses and 12, therapy sessions, see great results. People have taken 1 dose of LSD and not had another drink. And this is human beings having these amazing experiences with these plants and fungi. But what role do you think that these plants and fungi had in the evolution of human consciousness? And I know, there's the theories and the understandings of the role, like almost like the monolith that you mentioned, I think, in one of your presentations from 2001: Space Odyssey, right?
Right.
Did it have that kind of a role or a similar role into our own evolution, our minds and our consciousness?
Yes, I believe it did. And I think that, the monolith is maybe a good example of something that is completely disruptive, to those primates out on the Serengeti plain, just kind of doing their thing, beating each other up and whatever they do, You wake up the next morning and you're like, whoa, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
and that's a complete disruptor of your reality frame. And in that sense, I think that is what the psychedelics are. And I think that I think that we're back to the stoned ape theory, and the stoned ape theory has been, ridiculed and dismissed. But I actually think there's better evidence now to support that idea than there was in 1993 when Terence wrote The Food of the Gods and proposed this idea. And the two things that I think make it more plausible. Well, maybe three things, but two important things that we didn't really understand back in the day. And one of them is neuroplasticity, and the other is epigenetics. And neuroplasticity, we now know that psychedelics can actually stimulate neurogenesis, reorganize your neural architecture, have, long-term effects on the way that the brain is structured and the way it's functioning, change the connectivity patterns, do all of these things which last far beyond the experience itself, which is one reason why these things therapeutically, for treatment, you can screen people 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, whatever, and they still are experiencing those benefits. They're experiencing those long-term effects. And I think that reflects a neuroplastic response. We now know, back in the early 90s, we thought pretty much the brain is what it is at birth, and you have a certain complement of neurons at birth, and that's what you have. It's only downhill from there. Well, we know that doesn't work anymore, that we can have neurogenesis, and in fact, psychedelics can stimulate that and change the connectivity patterns. So you've got that. And then the other aspect of it is the epigenetics. These mechanisms can actually be inherited and passed from generation to generation. It's not a Darwinian. It's not a. It doesn't come through the somatic from the germ cells. It's a different kind of inheritance. But these epigenetic changes can take place and they can persist. So knowing that, and then knowing what we know about the probable environment in which hominids, evolved in Africa from about 2 million years up to the present. We know, for example, that these areas where the fossil evidence shows that they were much wetter than they are now. There was usually a rainy season. Sometimes there were the much higher levels of rainfall. We know that there were cattle in that area, or the precursors of the cebu cow, which happens to be the dung of the cebu cow is one of the preferred substrates for Psilocybe cubensis. You can find it to this day pretty much anywhere in the tropics where you've got rainfall and cows and pastures. You'll find this mushroom. It's pan-global. There's fossil evidence that the cows were there, at the same time, and the hominids were there, and almost certainly, if you have those two things, then the mushrooms had to be there.
Yeah.
And the hominids growing up in this area are, they're looking for food. They're hungry, and they would not be overlooked, especially something like Psilocybe cubensis, which in the tropics, it can be a quite robust mushroom. You can't not see it.
Right.
And once you see it, you're going to consume it because it looks succulent and delicious. And as a matter of fact, it is. It doesn't taste bad. And then you have the revelation, and I think that Terence in Food of the Gods said that it stimulates at low doses. It stimulates visual acuity, which is true. That there's evidence that it does do that. So helpfully, it's helpful in hunting and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And intermediate to high doses, it stimulates social bonding, sexual activity, and at much higher doses, it has this transcendent, it opens the portals to this other world of entities and experience, and so it's a dose related thing, but that's a real reality for people that are consuming this in their social group. And I've sort of built on this idea or extended this idea to the notion that it facilitates synesthesia, right? The hallucinogens very often facilitates synesthesia, and synesthesia is the basis of language. So, in my opinion, synesthesia, to be able to speak, you're uttering a sound which inherently is meaningless, except that it can be associated with a symbol or an internal visualization of something. We do this without even thinking about it because it's so ingrained to the way our brains work. But to utter a meaningful phrase or word or whatever usually it elicits an internal visual representation. I think that's what mushrooms taught us. They taught us to form abstractions. They helped us construct essentially this reality hallucination that is the characteristic of consciousness. They gave us the tools to develop cognition and to make that critical connection between something heard and something seen and something meaningful. And that's what language is, essentially. And once you get language going, then, all bets are off, because language is whether written or spoken, it's the medium by which we share and transmit information across time and space, across geographical regions, and also transmit it through time, and that's it. And that's not such a crazy notion, I don't think.
No, it doesn't sound like it. I mean, that makes a lot of logical sense there. And you can see there's two lines there. There's individual, and then there's, I guess, species. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but you can see the species as a group doing this, and it propagates through the generations, carries language with it. There's so much there that would expand our consciousness. But going back to what you said, it was pretty powerful for me, so I don't want to drag us too far backwards, but the neuroplasticity is kind of like we were talking about in the beginning, that we're shifting reality. You're getting the kludge out of your default mode network and you're cleaning up your brain.
Right.
We're actually repairing or rebuilding or restructuring some of the neural networks inside of the brain. And then I can pass that on to my kids.
That's right. Through epigenetics, you can, in fact, pass it on to your kids. So that's the key thing. Not only do these things alter consciousness in the moment, in your experience, but the way they alter it is reflective of changes that are going on at the neural level. And this is not wild speculation. This is now, it's pretty well demonstrated that they can do this.
Yeah, that's powerful. And then you take it, spread it across a tribe, a species, a land, or whatever, and you can see how that would definitely, this theory definitely seems like it's got a real good, strong basis to it. And it does seem like the latest insights support it.
It's much more compelling, I think, because it invokes the mechanisms that could make this happen. So I think it explains a lot, and because something happened. I mean, we are such an anomaly compared to any other species on the planet. And basically, what sets us apart more than anything else, I submit that it's language, and animals have, languages, they have but they're not like human language. And our human language, they can transmit signals to each other and that sort of thing. Maybe some of them do, but I have complex languages. But I think it's human language that can deal with abstractions. And abstractions are like an internal representation of an idea or an image or a symbol, but the symbol is freighted with meaning. And you can have an abstract, you can visualize something internal, and then we're blessed or cursed, depending on how you want to look at it, with these opposable thumbs and restless hands, and we can say, hey, I can not only visualize this thing, I can build this thing. And that's what we do. And so much of, civilization, of everything, of human artifact, I mean, we live in a world of that is basically the physical manifestation of a bunch of something that started out as ideas, as abstractions. And, we externalize those into the world, and we build, we make a better spear, we make a better rock, we make a better computer or starship,
Yeah. And in the study of consciousness, we talk a lot about phenomenal experiences, qualia, something it's like to feel something. So it's not only communicating these thoughts and these ideas and knowledge and information, but I can also kind of make another human feel something by saying something like black widow or a rattlesnake or apple pie,
Right.
or hot. And
Yeah.
so we took that information, and just through the years of experiencing and feeling and growing, that whole synesthesia of words to thoughts to feelings kind of went up that whole next level in consciousness.
That's right. That's right. And to just enunciate that term, you essentially re-experience it, what it's all about. You see the piece of pie, you smell it, you taste it, you create this little imaginary episode in your head about what it's like to interact with that thing, the piece of apple pie or the scorpion or whatever, and of course those other things can elicit all the fears, but there's a reason for that, because these things can be quite dangerous. So that's your self-preservation mechanisms,
your survival,
fight or flight reaction, kicking in. But you can imagine these things, and you get just as much of an effect. You get all the fear, and then hopefully you wake up and realize, oh, it was just a dream, or just something imagined.
Yeah.
But by this model, everything you experience is imagination. It's part of this model of reality that we inhabit. We're the producers, directors, and stars of our own movie.
Yeah, we sure are. We sure are. Now you've got this project going, the McKenna Academy, and looking at that, one of the things I feel like I saw recurring on there was you talking about, I think essentially humanity, all of us being at the, quote, the doorstep of global transformation in human consciousness. And what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that as a species, existentially, I think our problem is, as we look at the challenges that we're facing on the planetary scale, I think a lot of it is traceable to the fact that we've lost our connection with nature. We're out of sync with nature. And our historical experiences particularly in the West, has led us to devalue nature, to view it as something that we own, something that is not full of intelligence, something that's there for us to dominate and use and ultimately decimate and destroy. And we're well along in that process. And I think one of the things, again, the psychedelics do, they can, by refocusing our attention on our relationship to nature, they can make us aware that, this is our biggest existential problem. We have to wake up. We have to wake up to how badly we've gotten out of sync with nature, and then we have to rise to that challenge. We have to, I sometimes say in my talks, we have to wake up, but then we have to wise up, and that's the harder part. We have to get wise about the decisions we make and what we do going forward. But that can be informed by this wake up process, by this revelation. And I think until there is a widespread transformation in the collective consciousness, we're pretty much doomed, and we may be doomed anyway, but it's not too late. So I think the psychedelics can be catalysts in helping people wake up. So many people come away from their psychedelic experiences, especially with something like ayahuasca or mushrooms, and especially in nature, they come away with a sort of enhanced appreciation for our relationship to nature and really how marvelous nature is. And I think the term is one of the terms is biophilia, a sort of innate love for life and living things, and psychedelics elicit that. So again, they're doing what they've always done. They've always been these cognitive tools that have worked for us in evolution. And, they were important in essentially, I think, as catalysts that allowed consciousness to emerge. But they still have much to teach us, and we still have much to learn. That's one reason, I think a psilocybin experience, of high dose is as astonishing to us as it was to our hominid ancestors, a million years ago. It just completely disrupts what we think we know. And that's got to be a healthy thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Mushrooms clean up the forest and can clean up an oil spill.
Yeah.
And now it sounds like you're saying they're also really trying to do their best to clean up our environment around us.
In a sense, in a literal sense, I do think that's what they're doing. And this is totally in line with the way we know that they work. I gave a talk recently called Psilocybin and Its Place in Nature, and I was discussing as an example, I was talking about these different cordyceps species, which you're probably familiar with. I think they're called Ophiocordyceps now. They've changed the name, but these fungi that invade insects, and take over their behavior. They actually invade their nervous system and help and direct them to behave in a certain way. They turn them into zombies, essentially, and direct them to behave to optimize spore distribution for the fungus. Well, psilocybin, mushrooms do not invade your brain, at least we hope not, but you could look at psilocybin as a kind of neuroeco hormone. It's a hormone that the fungus produces to initiate symbiosis, and it has, we know that it's important in terms of interaction with psilocybin mushrooms with insects. There's a whole thing going on. They either attract insects or they repel them, but it's all related to spore dispersal. But then 75 million years after psilocybin made the scene, along come these big brain primates, or these primates with, if not large brains, at least complex. And, psilocybin was maybe repurposed to that. And in some ways, maybe, maybe psilocybin is directing human behavior in that respect, because, we get something out of the mushroom. We get the pleasure of taking psilocybin, which we find very interesting and usually pleasurable, always interesting. And the mushroom gets from that, it gets propagated, it gets spread around. And so that's the essence of a symbiosis. It gives us something and we give something back, which is we facilitate its, conquest of the world and its propagation. Terence had a famous saying once. He said, we're involved in a symbiotic relationship with something that has disguised itself as an alien invasion in order not to alarm us.
Yeah. Because I almost asked you about that in the beginning.
Invasion, it's a terrestrial invasion.
Yeah.
What it is.
Yeah, and it's the way that you frame that, in the way that it's almost like a reality hallucination of mankind, of planet Earth, almost being directed by these fungi.
Yes, I think you could make that case. In the same way that Michael Pollan, who's famous now for his book on psychedelics, but before that he wrote about food, and he wrote about the human relationship with our major food crops, and made the point that, in his book, have you read any of his stuff besides the How to Change?
No, just How to Change Your Mind. And I went to his book signing when he came through town, but no, I have not read his other books.
Well, his other books are amazing, and especially The Omnivore's Dilemma or The Botany of Desire. That's what he was writing about before.
Mm-hmm.
But he makes the point, for example, about corn, that corn is the quintessential capitalist plant. It adapts itself to a petroleum-based, monocultural, global type of agricultural production system. And he makes the point that, we think we're growing corn. Actually, corn is using us to carry out its program for world domination.
Interesting.
Yeah, I highly recommend those.
Yeah, books. I will have to read those, because I was obviously entranced by How to Change Your Mind. So I instantly became a Michael Pollan fan when I really didn't know much about him. So I'm going to have to go pick those up for sure.
Yeah, his other work is really very interesting. Those are the two main ones. I can't recommend them enough.
Okay.
In some ways, I'm glad that Michael wrote the How to Change Your Mind. I'm disappointed in it in some ways.
Oh, are you? How?
Well, I think that I think as far as it goes, I think it was written for people that are not really familiar with psychedelics, which is kind of good, because it's a way to educate people about psychedelics, but no, I guess that's basically, I guess that's basically my beef with it. He's a very good writer, and he's very well known. So he served the purpose by writing the book of making people aware of it. I was disappointed that he focused so much on psilocybin and said almost nothing about ayahuasca, which of course I've been involved in ayahuasca perhaps more than mushroom, at least professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was an oversight, because I think ayahuasca, in terms of its social context and the impact it's have on changing minds and getting out there to the people, if these things are like ambassadors from the Gaian mind, one way to think of them, I think ayahuasca is having maybe more impact on people than mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
But that may be changing too, because now the focus seems to be shifting back to mushrooms. And both of these two things are very important evolutionary catalysts, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. A friend of mine who is from Colombia had a similar observation about his book. And I know some others have mentioned the lack of, and I don't think this is his fault, the lack of paragraphs on microdosing. And he mentioned that when he talked, and he said, well, there's no studies really yet to cover about that. So I just chose to leave it out. And there's so many people curious about microdosing and what to do and how to do it that it was, I think some people that are maybe have dived deeper into psychedelics were maybe a little disappointed not to have at least some mention of that.
Yeah, he should have mentioned it, and but of course, there's lots of other sources of information.
Yeah.
And as far as his not talking about ayahuasca, I think in part because he didn't really have a good experience. I think he took it once or twice in, basements in Brooklyn or something, and didn't really go to the trouble of going to South America and having the experience. On the other hand, I've come to wonder, even though I've organized ayahuasca retreats and continue to be very involved in that, I'm beginning to wonder if that's really, I think it's tremendous medicine, but I think we're putting a lot of pressure on it, and so maybe ayahuasca tourism should be discouraged. I don't think you can put an end to it, but I think it should be maybe much less common than it was. I mean, I don't know if you've been to South America or...
I have not. I mean, actually, I have been to South America, but not for that purpose, ironically.
Yeah. Well, around Iquitos, which is kind of the epicenter, there's like 200 ayahuasca retreat centers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure on the two ingredients. You can't grow it fast enough, not to mention all of it that's being exported and so on. So fortunately, COVID has kind of shut that down, and again, maybe this is part of the message that the biosphere, the Gaia, if you want to use that term,
Pachamama,
is giving us, Pachamama. Maybe that's part of the message. Just slow down and not put so much pressure on these ecosystems and these plants and give them a chance to recover.
Yeah.
What I would like to see, I like the decrim movements that are happening, as uneven as they are, but I'd like to look 10 years ahead when all of these plants are totally unregulated. There's no legal prohibition of them.
Yeah.
And that creates an opportunity for local psychotherapists, psychedelic therapy centers, wellness centers to crop up in North America and Canada and Europe, where they can operate completely in the open, and then turn around and form alliances with indigenous people, not to bring people down there, and disrupt their culture, even though it's got economic benefits for them, but disrupt their culture, but work with them to say, okay, we'll leave you alone. You produce these medicines and export them to these localized centers, and maybe, bring the medicines to the people rather than the people to the medicines. And that might turn out to be a beneficial situation for everybody involved.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%.
20 to 30 year, scenario here.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That kind of thinking, I think, could benefit the decrim movement.
Yeah. Because if anyone was ever, qualified to kind of, again, indigenous people have been the stewards of this knowledge and this genetics for however long it's been. So obviously they're the ones that should, which they already had, they're the ones that we should entrust this sacred knowledge to.
Right.
these sacred plants, and and then on the other hand, you've got the whole scientific thrust, to turn something like psilocybin into a clinical medicine, and in some ways, I have to say that's good. It's good that it's coming into its own. I think potentially it can change psychiatry and mental health care in good ways, because those, mental health care sucks, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The approach to it is ridiculous. So it can change it. What I would not like to see, though, is some kind of, regulatory disjunct where you can, if you have $30,000, you can go to a clinic and get a psilocybin therapy. But if you want to go into the woods and pick mushrooms, you can get arrested. I mean, that's just wrong. People should have access to these medicines, whether they choose to use them, individually or in ceremonial situations or whatever. But lately I've been saying, we have a right to symbiosis. Humans have a right to symbiosis, and it should be asserted that way. That not just as a human right, because we're talking about non-humans too. So, it's an organismic right to form symbioses, mutually beneficial alliances, and
and from the consciousness angle, I hear the same argument that the one has the right to explore and expand his or her own consciousness.
Exactly. And that's the thing. The war on drugs has been, basically a war on people. You can't make war on drugs, but you could certainly make war on the people that use them. And there's been a lot of that. And also, though, it's a war on consciousness in a certain sense. Yeah.
Sure is. That's something I never really considered before.
Excuse me?
It's something I actually hadn't considered. It's a war on consciousness.
Yes, it really is. Graham Hancock talks about this, and very articulately. But really, that is what it is, and it certainly is older than the war on drugs that we think about it. I mean, the Inquisition and the suppression of indigenous peoples, had a lot to do with the suppression of their religion, and their religion was usually based on psychedelics. So that's why, the Inquisition came along. That's why the Spaniards, the colonialists, so brutally suppressed the use of mushrooms in Mexico when they came across it, because they the mushroom is called Teonanacatl, flesh of the gods. Well, the church father said, no, you can't do that. That's our,
right.
We're the only ones that get to give you the body of Christ, or the body of God. So it was very brutally, attempted to be suppressed. And of course it didn't work. And now we're looking at the other side of it. It went underground for 500 years, and now it's back, especially as we understand now what truly twisted and hollow institutions, things like the Catholic Church, have become. They have absolutely, in my opinion, no claim to any moral authority. Clearly, besides their suppression and essentially fostering genocide of indigenous people, there's very good reason to think that, because of the Christian attitudes toward indigenous people when the colonialists came around, there's a very good book, kind of an older one, but worth reading, called American Holocaust. And it's all about the genocide and decimation of indigenous people. Up to 800 million people were slaughtered or lost either to disease or war or back in the day. So this is the biggest Holocaust. And and then you look contemporaneously at the Catholic Church, and its reaction to all the abuse of people, sexual abuse and so on. So they have no moral authority at all, in my opinion. Of course, I'm quite biased because I'm a recovering Catholic. And,
Right.
Yeah. I got no use for the Catholic Church. And
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Definitely. So regarding consciousness, before we get to the last wrap-up question here, but regarding consciousness, what have I not asked you? Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of get out there and talk about, regarding plants and fungi and consciousness?
Well, I think we pretty well covered it. I just think that in a general sense, I think we are immersed in this network of symbiotic relationship. These are valuable allies, and you can think of them as allies. You can externalize them and talk about entities and all that.
Mm-hmm.
What I think they really are is tools for helping us discover what we already know, but we don't know that we know. So they're a way to uncover this information and present it to us in a way that we can understand it. And that often appears to be coming from outside. But then if you go back to, what we were talking about earlier about how the reality hallucination, it's all a reflection of our neurochemical brain states, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is that. I think we have to be grateful for these tools. They are what we need to evolve. They serve us in the same way now that they've always served us, and I think they are evolutionary and cognitive. They're co-evolutionary partners, and they're cognitive stimulants. They teach us how to think. And I would guess in closing, I would mention the McKenna Academy, because the McKenna Academy my concept was to make it a psychedelic university, the first psychedelic university since Eleusis, essentially, in which, not all the faculty members are human, right?
Yeah.
And it's a place for learning and integrating and exploring these ideas. And I think, if it has, if it has two main components to its mission, one of them is to help people, not tell people what to think, help people learn how to think. That's one thing, because any number of institutions, especially religions, but many other dogma-driven type systems, they're only too happy to tell you what to think.
Yeah.
The McKenna Academy is not about that. It's about helping people achieve their own consciousness and learn how to think for themselves, because that's what we need. And then the other side of that is to remind people, don't forget to be astonished. Don't forget to experience wonder. If you look at the world, if you look at nature, if you look at our existential situation and you're not amazed and in awe, you're missing the point somehow. You're not paying attention, because no matter what happens, the cosmos is incredible, and the cosmos, I do think, is permeated with intelligence and consciousness. Not necessarily that there are that many other alien races. There may be, although that's reason to think that they're possibly very rare. But just built into the structure of reality is incredible intelligence. If you look at it, and so I guess that's what the McKenna Academy is supposed to be, an educational nexus where people can, put it bluntly, come to have your mind blown.
Yeah.
Whether you blow it with psychedelics or just with ideas.
and conversation and blow your mind, expand your mind, and then epigenetically pass it on.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Well, that is fantastic. I definitely want to be involved with that one way or another. So I'm going to definitely keep an eye on you and what you're doing with the McKenna Academy. And for anybody listening, in the text, I'll have links to the McKenna Academy and also the Heffter Research Institute, where Dr. McKenna is on the board also.
Yep.
And so we'll have all that information. And Dr. McKenna, I can't thank you enough. That was really amazing, great information. And I'm just truly grateful for you to spend your time sharing that with me and our listeners.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a great time. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was a pretty good one. We were on a roll there.
So. Good. Excellent.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That concludes another edition of the Consciousness Podcast. Thanks again for listening. Please find us at Facebook at facebook.com/The Consciousness Podcast, at our Twitter handle at Conchcast, and don't forget to subscribe to our feed at theconsciousnesspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.